Now let's take a moment to just give you a little bit better idea of what SQL is. Again, that structured query language. Now you'll notice in this class that I call it SQL. Apparently the cool kids nowadays call it SQL. Just so you understand why I call it SQL, it's because I've been doing this crap for 30 years and literally pronunciation changes. Pronunciation changes. Back in the day, we all called it SQL. I guess nowadays everybody calls it SQL. I do as I do, so just kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about SQL here. But basically when we're talking about SQL or SQL, we're talking about structured query language, and it is a standard language used to interact with relational databases. SQL is actually an ISO standard, so this is a real standard. It was created in 1987 and is the basic syntax for most of the relational database systems that you'll be interacting with. Again, whether it's SQLite, MySQL, Postgres, MS SQL, MariaDB, and a whole bunch of others. So the important thing to understand with SQL or structured query language is once you get into that database system, when you're interacting with the records, more or less, it should be the same across all of these different database systems. So if you're just going in to a database system you may not have touched before and you just need to do a query to pull out specific information, basically SQL should work for you. Now the warning that I'll give you though is that there's SQL, structured query languages, and then there's the commands that you send to the database server itself. So I'll show you that in this class today, or in this class series as we go, that there's different commands for how you do things in SQLite versus MySQL, right? So if you're trying to figure out what the schema is for a SQLite database, use something called .schema, and that will show you basically the schema, basically the different tables and the different types of data that are supposed to be in the tables. If you want to see the tables in SQLite, you do .tables, and that will show you all the tables. So that's you interacting with the database server itself. That's not actually SQL. If you go to MySQL, it has its own commands for showing what tables are available, what databases are available, and that type of thing. Again, that is outside the SQL world, so that is just kind of one of those things to keep in mind. Now, one of the big things when you're dealing with SQL, again, whatever database engine that you're actually going to be using, is that the semicolon is going to be your delimiter. So when we talk about delimiter, that is where the command ends, how you tell the system that the command is over and for it to process it, right? And so basically in the SQL world, it is always the semicolon. So if you type in what is called a statement, so the statement is what we're going to be sending to the database server, and you hit enter, and then you just get another line, and then another line, and another line, and another line, and it doesn't actually process. What you need to do is you need to basically just do a semicolon and press enter from that point, and then it will run everything that you gave it up until that point and do whatever it is that you've commanded the system to do. So the big thing to be thinking about when you're dealing with SQL, again, whatever database system they're going to be using, as long as it's SQL, is that the semicolon is going to be your delimiter. Now here are two basic statements to kind of give you the idea of what SQL looks like. So this is called a select statement. So this is where we're going to go to a table within our database and we are going to pull information out of that table to do something with. So basically this is called a select statement. So we're selecting data out of that table. We're going to select all. So this means we're going to select all the values in all the columns. So however many columns there are in that record, we are going to grab all of those values and we are going to show it up on the screen. So select all from, and then whatever table name that you're selecting from, and so you plug the table name in there, and then you do the semicolon. It goes to that table name, it's going to pull all of the records, it's going to pull all the column information for all of those records, and then it's going to print out on the screen. If you have a small table, like 10 records in the table, it'll be something nice that you can look at on your computer monitor. If it's a table with 1,000,000 records, then you're just going to see 1,000,000 records zip by. Right? But anyways, that's basically how the SQL statement works. If you want to insert, so you're going to add a record to a table, use the insert statement. So insert into the table name. Then you say what columns. We talked about that schema thing. So what columns do we want to be inserting into? So we're going to insert into table name. name, age, and size, right? And then what values are we going to put into name, age, and size? We're going to say Bob for the name, 22 for the age, and small for the size, and then we do the semicolon. And so that is the idea of what an insert statement is going to look like, and this is basically what most of this whole series is going to be, so you will understand this better in the classes going forward. Now, if you've already dealt with programming, interacting with databases, and especially if you've used a framework such as Django, one of the things that you may have run into is what is called an ORM, an Object Relationship Mapper. Right? So Django, that is a web app framework. It allows you to create web applications. Initially, Instagram apparently was created with Django. Pinterest was originally created with Django. So you can create really powerful, large-scale applications with it. And one of the things with Django is it's able to interact with relational databases. It actually comes, again, with SQLite as part of the package that you have when you start using Django. The thing is, Django doesn't want you to directly interact with the database, right? So by sending SQL statements directly to the database, there can be some security issues, there can be some other problems with that, and so basically with Django, they try to eliminate as many security problems as possible, and so they abstract out Python communicating with the database from the SQL statements themselves. And that's where you get an ORM, or an Object Relationship Mapper, and there are different ORMs in the Python world. We are not going to be talking much at all about ORMs in this particular series because I'm teaching you SQL, and SQL doesn't use the ORM syntax in order to do things. So basically, if we have Python here, so if you know anything about Python, right, we have a Python thing here. So we have students equal, we're going to go to the student database, so student.objects.all. So we're going to go and we're going to get all the records, and that is what an ORM statement would look like. Then if we want to print out all the values, right, to the screen, something like that, I'm going to say for student in the students, print student.name, comma, student.age, comma, student.size. And so basically what's happening here is you're having Python communicate with like the Django ORM, or whatever ORM that you're using. That ORM then communicates directly with the database server, basically turns whatever you've asked for into a SQL statements on its own, basically grabs all of that information, it then formats that how it sees fit, and then basically you're able to interact with the data coming back, again, based off of the syntax for the ORM that you're using. So again, if you're going to be using Django, if you're going to use other frameworks, what you may notice is that they use a relational database for storing records, again, even especially SQLite, but when they're interacting with the database, they're interacting with something called an ORM. The basic idea that you need to be thinking about is all that ORM is doing is it's allowing Python to communicate with it, so that it, hopefully, in a more stable and secure fashion, maybe is able to communicate with the database system, and you're able to basically keep things a little bit neater and a little bit more secure. So that's the basic concept behind SQL. Again, it is an ISO standard. The delimiter is a semicolon, and the statements that you see here, again, are SQL statements, and this is basically what I'm going to be showing you how to do throughout this series of classes.